The most iconic photograph of Soviet victory was staged. The morning after Berlin fell, Yevgeny Kaldey posed exhausted soldiers atop the Reichstag. The men in that frame were malnourished, traumatized, hollowed out. Roughly half the frontline infantry who reached Berlin would be dead within a year. This was the army that won the war, and it was weaker than the Red Army that fought at Kursk in 1943. On the morning of July 5, 1943, the Red Army stood at its wartime peak. The Soviet command structure was anchored by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, overseeing the defense and counterattack plans from Stavka headquarters. Alexander Vasilevsky, as chief of the general staff, coordinated the massive fronts, while front commanders like Nikolai Vatutin and armored force leader Pavel Rotmistrov prepared for the largest armored engagement in history. The numbers were staggering. Across the Kursk salient, the Red Army fielded nearly 5,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, according to order of battle tables from the Central Archive. This concentration included hundreds of T-34s, KV-1s, and the first IS-2 heavy tanks, many rolling straight from factory number 183 in Nizhny Tagil, which had just recorded a monthly output spike with over 1,300 T-34s produced in July alone. The 5th Guards Tank Army, commanded by Rotmistrov, formed the armored spearhead. Its tank crews had completed an average of 250 hours of training, a level that allowed for coordinated maneuvers and battlefield repairs under fire. Infantry divisions, such as the 7th Guards and 307th Rifle, were close to their authorized strength of 9,500 men, each with 3 rifle regiments and full support weapons. The officer corps, many of whom had survived the purges and the disasters of 1941, brought hard-earned experience from Stalingrad and Kharkov. Most company and battalion commanders had served over a year on the front, and a significant share were graduates of the Frunze Military Academy or the Red Army Staff College. This was a force built for deep operations, layered anti-tank zones, integrated artillery, and mobile reserves. On paper and in practice, the Red Army at Kursk represented the highest point of Soviet combined arms capability. The scale, the training, and the leadership all converged in the summer of 1943, creating a military machine whose quality would not be matched again before the war's end. Soviet military strength in 1943 rested on a foundation of industrial capacity and rigorous training. The Red Army's frontline strength hovered near 6 million, a figure supported by War Ministry records and factory output tables. This manpower baseline allowed the Soviets to field divisions at or close to their authorized strength, with rifle units averaging 9,500 men and armored corps fully equipped with the latest T-34s and KV-1s. The factories behind this force, most notably factory number 183 at Nizhny Tagil, delivered a surge of tanks in the months leading up to Kursk, with July's output alone exceeding 1,300 T-34s. Each tank crew entering the line in 1943 had completed an average of 250 hours of combined classroom and field training. These hours translated directly into coordinated maneuvers, rapid target acquisition, and the ability to execute battlefield repairs under pressure. Training curricula from armored schools included live fire exercises, map reading, and technical maintenance, reflecting a standard that would later prove impossible to sustain. This depth extended beyond the armored branches. Infantry replacements cycled through weeks of tactical drills and weapons handling before joining their regiments. The operational doctrine at Kursk, shaped by the lessons of Stalingrad and Kharkov, demanded that units move as integrated teams, artillery, tanks, engineers, and infantry acting in concert. The Red Army's command system, staffed by officers who had survived the purges and the disasters from 1941 to 1942, enforced these standards through repeated exercises and after-action reviews. The result was a force capable of executing complex, multi-layered defenses and launching counterattacks with precision. In the summer of 1943, the Red Army's industrial and training edge produced a fighting machine whose institutional quality set a benchmark that would not be matched in the years that followed. By the end of 1943, the Red Army's strength on paper was growing fast, but the human cost behind those numbers was staggering. Over the next 20 months, Soviet casualty tables recorded nearly 4 million dead, wounded, or missing. Operation Bagration alone in the summer of 1944 accounted for about 770,000 of those losses. Each new offensive demanded more replacements, and the draft ledgers show where those men came from. Boys born in 1925 and 1926, many still teenagers, rushed through basic training in as little as 2 to 4 weeks before being sent to the front. The scale of the Red Army ballooned to 11 or even 12 million by 1945, yet the average rifle division, which once stood near 9,500 men, now limped forward with only 3 to 4,000. For many, the first taste of combat was also their last. Training camps could not keep pace. There was no time for tactical drills or weapons maintenance, only the barest introduction to the rifle and bayonet. The result was an army that looked stronger on the surface, but whose core, its experienced soldiers and small unit cohesion, had been hollowed out by relentless attrition. In the final year of the war, the Red Army's mass concealed a sharp drop in fighting quality, as entire divisions became collections of strangers, led by boys scarcely older than the men they commanded. The command structure that anchored the Red Army at Kursk had already survived one disaster, the Great Purge, which erased around 30,000 officers from the ranks before the war even began. That wound never fully healed. When the German invasion struck in 1941, another 100,000 officers and senior non-commissioned officers were lost in the chaos of retreat and encirclement. The result was a leadership pipeline that was gutted twice in less than 5 years. To fill the gap, the Frunz Military Academy and other officer schools compressed their programs from 2 years to just 6 months. Crash courses replaced deep study, and field exercises were swapped for lectures and quick staff drills. The numbers tell the rest. By 1945, casualty rates for company and battalion commanders had soared above 80%. Most men leading platoons or companies into Berlin had barely finished their own training before being handed command. The files from the Central Archive show a constant churn, junior officers promoted after only a few weeks at the front, many with little or no experience in combined arms tactics. This collapse in leadership continuity left gaps that could not be filled by enthusiasm or numbers alone. The institutional knowledge that made the Red Army effective at Kursk had been bled away, replaced by a generation of officers who learned on the job, often at the highest cost. The effects would ripple through every aspect of the war effort, from equipment handling to battlefield decision-making. Tank crews who fought at Kursk in 1943 entered battle with an average of 250 hours of structured training. That was enough to master gunnery, maneuver, and emergency repairs under fire. By 1945, that figure had plummeted below 100 hours. Maintenance logs from the spring offensive reveal why. As the Red Army's armored force ballooned in size, the training pipeline simply could not keep pace. New crews, many barely out of their teens, were rushed through abbreviated courses that focused on basic driving and firing, leaving little time for tactical drills or technical troubleshooting. This shortfall became painfully clear in the final assault on Berlin. Soviet records list nearly 2,000 tanks and self-propelled guns lost in 2 weeks, some to German fire and many to breakdowns and abandoned vehicles. Quality control reports from Uralvagonsavod and factory number 183 detail recurring defects in T-3485s and IS-2s, misaligned gun sights, faulty transmissions, and leaky fuel systems. Even after the victory, only about 55% of the Red Army's armored fleet was considered operational. Planning documents for 1946 projected a usable pool of just 3,500 to 4,000 tanks, barely enough to sustain another major offensive. On paper, Soviet armor looked stronger than ever, but diaries from maintenance crews and after-action reports told a different story. There were too many vehicles, not enough skilled hands, and a shrinking margin for error as the war drew to a close. By the summer of 1945, the Red Army's ability to sustain another major offensive was sharply constrained by the realities behind its victory. Rebuilding the officer corps after years of catastrophic loss required a minimum of 12 to 18 months. That interval could not be shortened by decree or by mass promotion. The leadership pipeline, already stretched thin by the Great Purge and the disasters of 1941, had been further eroded by the high casualty rates among company and battalion commanders. Even with the war over, the process of training and redeploying a competent cadre could not be rushed without sacrificing basic effectiveness. Demographic records show the Soviet conscription pool was nearly exhausted. The 1925 to 1926 cohort had already been called up, and by 1945, any attempt to maintain frontline strength would have forced the draft boards to reach for boys born in 1930 or 1931, children of 15 or 16. The alternative, extensive retraining of existing units, would have required diverting resources from the urgent task of national reconstruction. Soviet economic planners faced a stark choice: rebuild cities and factories, or rearm for another round of total war. The economy, battered by years of destruction, could not support both. Forced generation models and economic studies from the period confirm these limits. Even with 12 million men in uniform, the Red Army's effective fighting strength was hollowed out. The collapse of the Wehrmacht in 1944 to 1945 made victory possible. But if Germany had remained intact, the Soviet Union would have faced a crisis of manpower, leadership, and logistics. The army that entered Berlin was not ready to launch a new campaign in 1946. It needed time, a year or more, to recover the institutional depth, command stability, and economic capacity that total war had consumed. The Soviet triumph in Berlin masked a deeper truth. Victory can coexist with exhaustion and institutional decline. Today, military power is still measured by numbers, not resilience. The lesson endures. Success may hide the fault lines that determine whether future challenges will break or remake an army.